Hello, everyone, and welcome to eLearnChat, where talk is knowledge. And today we're joined by two very knowledgeable people, both returnees to the show. Kevin on his second visit, and Trina on a third, I think, or is it fourth? Not sure.
Yeah, I've lost track as well.
So here is Trina Rimmer. Hey, Trina, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you, Rick?
I'm doing great. This is our last show of the season. We're about a week from Christmas, and unlike a lot of guys, unfortunately, I haven't done anything. I'm getting there. Plus, I was gone a week, and you said you're probably not in much better shape, huh?
I really am not. I have to say, this year has been crazy. My husband's been working a lot of extra hours, so between that and taking care of kids and taking care of clients, I'm a little frazzled.
Yeah. Well, the kids and clients are synonymous.
Yes.
Yes, many times.
Sometimes I would liken them to the children,
Yes.
except perhaps less easily tamed.
Right. And we've got with us today Kevin Thorn from, I want to say Learn Nuggets, but it was something else. It's
Nuggethead.net.
Nuggethead.net. Hey, Kevin, how are you? It's been a while.
Good, Rick, how are you?
I'm good. Now you were both at DevLearn, right?
Yes.
You know, I miss both of you, and I missed almost everybody I wanted to see. And I'm going, what gives with these shows?
It just seems like every year there's like an extra 100 people you want to connect with.
This
and
was
it
an
seems
extra,
like it takes.
And there were an extra.
There less time, and it's crazy.
And there were an extra 1,000 people at the show.
That's true. Yeah, it was a big event.
It just seemed like, but the expo hall wasn't as busy as it could have been. So, and I wound up in the expo hall helping out a little bit, and I missed a lot of people. I saw for the first time Brent Schelenker, finally, and I didn't even see him. My wife's son, she goes, "Come with me," and just kind of heads over there. And it was Gina, Shrek, and Brent were talking. So we got into that conversation, and I missed a ton of people. And I go,
well, that's a big place too. So
yeah, but I kept saying I can't miss Trina. Trina's tall. She's
and you literally can't miss me because I'm over 6 feet tall usually.
Yeah,
and I'm wearing heels.
And you had Tracy, who's also tall, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So both. I go. I'm not going to be able to miss these two. I never saw you. Never saw. Not even close to seeing. I go. Where was she? So did you go down to the Expo Lauder?
I did a session in the expo on the I think it was the management stage.
Okay.
And I spent actually a fair amount of time in there. I had my husband with me this year, so I was kind of acquainting him with some of the companies in our industry and introducing him to.
And he's tall too, from what I heard.
I'm sorry?
And he's tall too.
Very tall.
So I should have been able to see both of you.
Yeah, he's 6'7".
6'7", okay.
Yeah. So
He's a giant.
he's a big guy. Yeah, you don't.
And I would have definitely spotted. No, I didn't see anybody. It's just I missed other people. I did see Dawn Mahoney for a very short time. Literally, I saw her. We said hi, gave her a hug. And I turned around. Somebody pulled me in one direction. She was gone.
Yeah, I didn't even get to see Dawn. I only saw Shannon Tipton as a drive-by.
Oh, I didn't see her either.
Yeah, it was one of these. I'll catch you later as we were both walking down the expo hall.
Well, we were thinking next year of actually putting up a hospitality suite and inviting people to the suite, so therefore we don't miss everybody.
I love that idea.
And come.
But you know what? The guild did a. It's when they did the last year at the Learning Solutions. They combined the ecosystem conference with Learning Solutions.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was a opening night reception, but the reception was not in the expo hall typical. So, but that went really well. That was a chance that everybody that was it was out in the patio, out there in the back by the hotel, and it just seemed a lot. You were able to connect with a lot more folks that way, I think.
That's probably a good idea, because the expo hall is not a good place to connect often because people are just moving.
And it's loud.
And it gets loud in there. It does.
Well, where were we? Caesar? Was it Caesar's? No, it was Bellagio.
Which is pretty. It's a nice hotel.
Huge, though. Gigantic.
It is huge. I didn't think it was a great venue.
Several hundred football fields away from each other and still be at the same event.
Yeah. Now, the only mistake I thought I saw at the expo, actually at the show, was with the breakfast meetings. But it wasn't a breakfast meeting. It was just one of those get up and have a... Well, but they were about a block away from where the coffee was. So no one showed up. I was looking at we had 15 people out of a 200-seat room. I went, oh, wow. It was morning buzz, the morning buzz sessions. Nobody was there. And then the room next to us was empty. It's like, oh, man, this sucks. But the coffee was about a block away the other way. And people got coffee, didn't keep going. So it was sort of interesting.
That large, getting people to the food and food to the people is just,
it's tough.
It's got to be a logistical nightmare.
It's tough. Also, their convention center wasn't set up real easy to get to places. There's a lot of little turns, and it was quite a way from one room or one place to another. So I guess that's why they're not going back. But
although I do like that, I always enjoyed staying at the Aria, and I very much enjoyed staying at the Bellagio as well. But I did like that the walk, at least from my room to the conference center, wasn't quite so bad. But I realized that was where the tower that I was placed.
You were in the second tower, right?
Yeah,
which was
if I'd been
closer.
placed in that other tower, it would have been more of a hike.
We were in the first, and it was a hike.
Yeah,
it was a ways to get. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't that close. It depends where you were going.
We had to walk through the accountants, which I loved all those CPAs.
Oh, how funny!
Their little suits and ties and their clipboards.
Yes. So anyway, what are we talking about today? Storyboarding, I think.
Yeah,
a little bit about that, I think.
That's a good, that's a good talk always, because that is the bane of almost all of our existences. It's not so much writing the storyboards. That's fairly easy. It's getting a storyboard that people understand. And because
I think it's more about the concept of storyboarding than it is the actual act of storyboarding. But we can talk about that.
Yeah. So how do you folks handle? I'll give you a quick synopsis of how we handle. We do it's kind of an old-fashioned way. We've done both. We've done actually a very nice storyboard with graphics and everything. And we'll use tools like Storyboard Quick, or we'll even just use PowerPoint, whatever, and then put that into more often than not a Word document. So we have the old AV template, the audio video template. We've got kind of an area on the top for a screenshot. We've got a left column for programmer notes and anything that we want to really call out. And on the right is all the narration or captions. Simple, and yet people still have a hard time imagining. If we don't do the graphic part of it, they can't imagine what we're talking about. And that's always the hardest part, getting people to understand, what are we doing here? And
yeah, I mean, I've found that storyboarding can be a really helpful design component of the design process, primarily because it supports better development. But from a client standpoint, storyboards are just so detailed that most clients, their eyes gaze over. They glaze over when you hand them a storyboard,
and then they miss things, right?
Fully understand how to translate that into the interaction that you ultimately develop.
Yeah. So how do you work around that?
Well, one of the things that Kevin and I have been doing on a lot of the projects we're working on together is just a lot more prototyping. So we might be storyboarding the entire course, but we're working with the client to call out specific interactions that are highly complex or really high impact. In other words, like a lot of the core learning objectives really tie into those particular interactions. And we're calling those out early and starting to prototype them right up front. So essentially a rough storyboard of those key interactions, get them into an authoring tool, prototype them, iterate, prototype over and over until we get it refined. And then the same time, we're still refining the larger storyboard for the course, and then we're stitching all the pieces together. And we're not 100% convinced that that's the only way to do it, but for some of the projects we've worked with, or some of the clients we've worked with recently, that approach seems to be helping them get us to a point where they're like, oh, I finally get it. This is how this is going to work.
How much time do you spend educating the clients on how to understand the storyboards? A lot, huh?
Oh, it never ends, really, because...
I'm just going through my mind. There's so many variants and things that cross over that come to mind, based on what Trina was just saying, that, the origination of storyboarding is from the animation world, Walt Disney.
Yep.
And that carried into the film industry, as you know. And so the typical process of storyboarding is usually in film, TV, video, animation, sort of that sort of industry. And it's never really grabbed hold of the training and development or the e-learning industry in general. So it's how do you transition sort of this proven process in these other genres into this genre and be efficient with it. And what Trina said, we haven't necessarily nailed down a specific process that this is it, this is the golden ticket, because I don't think it's that so much. It's an art more than it is a science.
Yeah.
And you have to fit that process into your workflow, because we have, and I've heard, many times, we've got, probably more often than not, we've got folks that are working on projects by themselves. They're a one-person shop. So then we have the mindset of, I don't have time to storyboarding. I just go right into development because I have it in my head. And if that works for you and you can cover all the bases, then that's the art. That's your process.
Mm-hmm.
I think the goal that we're trying to find is being more efficient. Not necessarily use this tool to storyboard or that tool to storyboard, or you've got to have graphics in, or you've got to have this, and you got to have, that's part of the process.
Yep.
It's really about how do you effectively communicate with your client, and how do you move a project along efficiently and not get so bogged down in the storyboarding process, or don't get so bogged down in the development process because you didn't storyboard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taken us a couple of years to really refine this process that we've got. And what we're hoping to do is start sharing some of the techniques that we've learned along the way, or we've discovered or developed along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's, if you're working as one-man shows or two, you have more control over what you want to do versus more of a production shop where you've got handoffs that go along the way. And that creates a whole different set of issues, because
Right.
you're not only handing off to the client for the reviews and the approvals, then you're also handing off from the instructional designer to maybe somebody who's reviewing that, maybe to another person who then is putting the graphics together or the videos. There's a lot more handoffs, and that process has to be very well defined, or there'll be a lot of breaks right along the way where people don't really know where are we going. Now I made a bad assumption one time, and we all know what the word assume means, but it's we were doing a project with Adobe, and this was when they rolled out the dog agrees on that one, but we rolled out the eLearning Suite 1. I think it was the eLearning Suite 1 for Adobe on their website. So we did all the graphic content for that and all the animations and stuff. And we were working with some corporate people. We put together a storyboard because they wanted to visualize. So we just used the storyboarding tool. And we gave it to them, and they said, we don't like these graphics. Well, no, those aren't the graphics you're getting. It's a mock-up. I don't like the graph. No, they're not. We went back and forth
that's,
about.
Rick, you nailed it. That's one of the biggest things
Mm-hmm.
that I learned early on when dealing with SMEs is the storyboard is not about the visual design.
No.
It's about the instructional design.
Yes.
And if you put graphics into a storyboard, then you're drawing the attention, and because that's where people that don't understand what we do are outside of this circle.
Yeah.
They don't understand it.
Now, this wasn't an e-learning person. This was actually more of a video producer, but she expected it to look like the final result. I go, well, no, we don't want to do that yet because we don't know what you want yet.
And that's just it. It's refining a process
Mm-hmm.
within that particular work team or that particular project, and it's one project to the next is so different because there's a different group of people involved, or a different subject matter expert, or a different client, or a different customer, and they're coming to it based on their own personal experiences working with e-learning development, where you could have one that's a smooth project from start to finish,
sure.
and then you might have another that it's the first time they've ever been introduced to this media. So now it's a little bit more hand-holding because you have to sort of educate the process along the way. And one of the things, a current project we're working on, we've identified some of these processes, and what Trina was mentioning a minute ago, that sort of rapid prototyping different elements of the larger project that's in the storyboard, and get that through sort of an iterative process first, and then stitch it all together later for like a larger sort of alpha or beta release seems to be working fairly well for
Okay.
us right now.
So are you finding, and again, every client's different, but are you finding that the client is grasping the look, the feel, the idea behind it, the interactions, the captions, they're understanding what you're doing?
I would say
Yeah.
yes. I mean, I think that, this particular client also is extremely easy to work with, which, obviously that's not the case with everyone. But I think that this process has been far more successful than a lot of the processes we've done in the past, which were a little more linear, in as much as we would, develop an outline, content outline, get the client to bless us on that, and then develop a look and feel, sort of a user interface, and simultaneously begin the storyboarding process. And what would end up happening is we would try and mesh the two in the storyboard. And to your earlier point, Rick, people couldn't understand placeholder graphics. They didn't grasp how the user interface would actually work with content in it. And it became kind of a painful lesson learned, because we were already in the alpha phase, having developed this storyboard that people just sort of rubber stamped because they didn't understand exactly what they were getting. And I think the average client just doesn't, and apologies for the barking dogs. Amazon is delivering packages in my neighborhood, and they're just refusing to let the delivery guy go anywhere. But the clients are they're not designers, and it's our job to educate them, and that education process is a continual thing. The one thing that I've found somewhat successful is I use the analog of building a car or building a house. You don't go watch the design process at Toyota, for instance, and see that they go to the factory floor and start building a full car right off the bat. They sit down, they plan it out, they gather requirements. It's very systematic. And then they start a series of prototyping. And when they have new design ideas, they build the specs, they prototype, and then they basically use that prototyping as a way to verify against the specs. So there's a sort of an element of iteration that goes into this process. And I think that that's a healthy part of any design process.
I think you nailed it perfectly there, Trina, because it's really interesting to me that most other industries have sort of that analog design phase, whether it's product design, service design, an IT software development lifecycle. There is so much documentation that goes into developing a product or a new service or a new process or a new piece of software. But yet there's this seemingly resistance to storyboarding or designing, on paper and pencil, mapping it out, architect what you're going to do before you do it. And I get it. I mean, I understand that a lot of the e-learning authoring tools today are extremely intuitive to where you can just jump in and start going, especially then it goes back to that one-person team. I'm by myself, so I have to wear all the hats together. So what the challenge is for us is, it's not so much do you storyboard or do you not. It's not a if or then. It's not. It's more of an art, and it's really identifying where the values of storyboarding come into building e-learning projects, and the benefits of what happens after. I mean, Rick, like video shoots and doing video, there's storyboarding involved.
Sure.
So when you're dealing with now, if you have a linear project that's not very large and it's just sort of a linear navigation path, do you storyboard there? You might. Do you have to?
We storyboard.
Be able to knock it out in PowerPoint and then just sort of copy and build it in your authoring tool. But if you have something that's a little bit more complex, it's a little bit more scenario based. There's mixed media with audio narration along with some video. You've got a custom user interface. You've got custom interactions. Yeah. All of these different moving pieces. And what I like to call is a storyboard workbook, where it's several different documents, where one might be a storyboard specifically just for the final quiz. And there might be another storyboard that's specific just to particular interactions. And then a style guide. We put
Yeah.
together a style guide that identifies everything that's sort of global to the interface on everything from navigation buttons, where they're located on the screen. And while that might take extra time to document, I think the benefit, well, it's proven beneficial on our end that when you get a return client or you have to return to a project, and being able to go to a particular document and see what you've done 6 months ago or 9 months ago, you don't have to sort your way through the source file or the authoring environment itself. You can start going back to your documents and look at where those changes might need to occur. And I think it's just, there's extra time on putting that together, yes. But it's proven to be extremely beneficial post-publish or post-delivery.
Yeah, because
I think
invariably,
it also helps for just consistency throughout, because what ends up happening is, you go through this process, you get to some sort of an alpha or initial release of the entire thing. They take a look at it, and suddenly somebody has a very strong opinion about a font or about how the feedback box is rectangular and it should have rounded corners because rectangular shapes are too aggressive. I mean, the kind of stuff that you get from clients.
oh yeah,
And so you need to go back and figure out, okay, how am I going to incorporate this in a way that's consistent while having some sort of a documented style guide as part of this larger plan is really helpful, because then you go in, you make that update, you make it across your, hopefully your master, if you have a master slide concept in the authoring tool you're using, and you roll it out, and then boom, you're done, versus going and sort of trying to recreate it every time you've got feedback or every time you've got this specific button. It's all documented there for you, and it's also a nice way to hand it off if you're creating something that somebody else is going to have to maintain. They've got right there everything that they need to either copy what you've created and apply it to a different course, or to go back and make updates in a really efficient manner.
Exactly. And I want to add, too, that it's a level of accountability to what you were just mentioning, Trina, that if you come back later and say, I don't know necessarily I like that font, or this particular annotation and the way things are annotated against the translation or excuse me, the narration. And what happens is a lot of times we'll get feedback 1 or 2 releases in, and we'll look at that feedback and question it because it's totally contradicts what their original request was. So then we go back to the original request, which is documented in the original storyboard, and then we're able to have a conversation about why are we wanting to make this change now when this was the agreed upon sort of direction in the first place, which really helps guide that conversation, so we're not going back and forth and saying, okay, let's change it back the way we did before, and then you send that out and say, well, I don't like that. Let's put it back the way it was the third time we did it.
Yeah, it really helps with those trade-off conversations for sure, because then you can say, okay, previously you were okay with this, but it looks like you feel strongly it needs to be changed. We can do that, but here's what it's going to cost us in terms of time frame or in terms of resources or money or what have you.
and part of the thing is what we try to explain really up front is, if you're building a house, you need a blueprint.
Yes.
Exactly.
And if you don't follow your blueprint and change in the middle, it's going to cost you a lot more.
Yeah.
And some of them get it, some don't. We've been through that, and we say, look, it's foundation piece. Without that foundational piece, you're going to wind up running in circles, spending a lot more money, spending a lot more time. You'll be irritated because we asked for a change order. We don't want to ask you for a change order. And all of that is part of just the initial education process. So they understand, we're trying to minimize the cycles, the amount of cycles we have to go back and forth to make something happen that should be pretty obvious or straightforward, but not necessarily to them. So there's there's a lot of hand-holding in the whole, it's funny,
Well,
we give
yeah.
documents, but there's a lot of hand-holding in that whole process.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
it's about managing expectations, and that's where that blueprint comes in to help
Yep.
with those expectations that you're managing. And in the end, our job, I think, or our role, is to build better experiences. And if we want to move away from the linear sort of path navigation, then do you need a storyboard for that? Probably not. But if you do really truly want to build better learning experiences, then it takes time to design that. And you can't design that in a development environment. You have to put that tool away, because that design may surface that you need additional tools that you either don't have or you hadn't thought of. So that's where the design phase, and we're all familiar with that. That's the instructional design part of building e-learning, is that we start with a design phase. It's just hard for me to really wrap my head around skipping that process. I've never skipped it, and I hear conversations about it's in my head. I don't do storyboarding. I go right to the development.
Right.
But I've witnessed folks that have done it that way and then found themselves in sort of a pickle, to what Trina was just mentioning, that now I've got sort of this conundrum of, I've got to make this change. I don't remember what I did, or I've got too far into this. Now I've got to break it all apart and essentially start over because it's not what was intended.
Well, it's funny. I know a couple of independents who we've used in the past, and they're pretty good. But when they work on their own, it's funny. They wind up getting an effective rate of about 50 cents an hour.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly redoing. And storyboards, what's a storyboard? Or what's a script? They exactly like you said, they run by the seat of their pants, and they don't really know what hit them when it hit them.
I will guarantee you, if you spend 80% of your project time on the design, you will fly through development. You can eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and turn on your favorite music, and you'll be done before you know it.
Yeah.
If you just have your map and you follow your own design, the development goes so much quicker. It's much more fluid.
I think it's all about putting things framing things in the context that's meaningful to the client, though, because what often happens is people get that they should probably storyboard this course that they're about to create. They think, gosh, this is a little complex. It would be nice if I had the time, but I'm not given the time, and I don't have the power or authority to sort of push back on the timeline. So what I do instead is I go quickly into the authoring tool, which, hey, we all do that, and that, as Kevin said, that might be fine for a linear course and something that's very templated. But if you are having to create something that's really dynamic and custom, it's a recipe for disaster, it's a recipe for rework, and it's a recipe for going over the time frame that you didn't fight for up front. So you might as well just do pushing back up front, and that way you can frame it in the context of, here's what I'm going to save you in the long run. Here's what we're going to do that's going to be so much better than rework. Yeah,
and I'll tell you, we've been working with one client for about 12 years. It's a long time with one client, but they're very large, and we've done a lot, probably thousands of small and large projects, a lot of Adobe Captivate simulations. They do a lot of simulation training for customer service reps, and they do logo changes every so often. We've had 3 literally in the last 12 years, and you have to go back to every single piece and change them.
Yeah.
And not only that, you've got to change references to logos, you've got to change certain script elements, as well as screenshots have all changed now because there's the logo on the screens. That's a lot of work, but we go back to the old storyboards. If we didn't have the storyboards, it'd be double the work. Yeah. So you can go back and ask the question, do you really want this one? This is an old course. What about these screens? This screen only had 1 change, but you've got 30 changes. And you know what? That makes life a lot easier. Without that storyboard, we'd be going, uh-oh, what are we going to do?
Exactly.
So it is a tough process. It is a tough one for the users to figure out. Now, a lot of people like to storyboard or write their scripts. Now, Kevin, you mentioned multiple documents, which is not a bad idea. In some respects, it's difficult depending on the client. It's going to be client dependent. Some can barely handle 1 document. Give them 3 and the heads explode.
It's like you had mentioned early on. It's people focus on the graphics, or they focus on something. So. And I get in conversations where folks they want to storyboard and they're looking for a template. sort of a starting point. Where that comes into that whole, and that's where I think it's more of an art than it is a template or a rigid sort of thing. It's a process. So it's just about figuring out what works for you. You know the basics, you know the fundamentals of it, and it's just what do you put in a storyboard, what don't you put in it, and then what Trina and I have done is we have a storyboard which is sort of our document, and that's sort of a document for us to put all those little development notes and those little extra programming notes that really have no value for a client to even look at or would even understand. So we keep the storyboard that we share with the client very simple, very easy to read. In that way, we're able to use that document as a launching pad and to build those conversations. Now, for the narration, we just strip that down altogether because it comes into depending on which authoring environment you use, the authoring environment is a little bit, let me give you an example. A particular quiz has two feedback. You have a correct and an incorrect feedback, basic question. If you have audio for the question statement itself, and then you have a separate audio for each of the feedback, that's 3 audio files. Well, now it comes into a naming convention of how do you manage those assets when you have a large project. And I'm just talking about a particular quiz with a couple of feedback, but if you have various other paths and navigation and other interactions which all have various different audio narration to go with it, now you have another document that helps manage all those assets in a good naming convention, so that when you get the audio from the audio talent, it's described in such a way that matches your developing environment. So if you develop it yourself or you have a developer and you pass off, here are the audio files, here's the storyboard, put it together, then it goes back to efficiency. How do you make your process efficient? And this additional document strips a lot of the confusion out by trying to navigate through a main storyboard when it comes to audio. And then we have, I don't know if you call it a storyboard so much as it is a style guide. And a style guide is just, it confirms the branding that we're going to be using, so that a lot of times, a client will say we have to use these branding guidelines. They'll send their branding guidelines with colors and fonts and various sizes that are approved. Well, we incorporate that into our own document along with navigational elements, behaviors. And let me give you one last example is, for instance, if you have a particular object or button on a screen that is consistent with learn more, or maybe it's more information, then stylistically, from a visual design perspective, you want to sort of teach that behavior for the user that anytime they see this button in this color, in this shape, with this icon, there's an action that's associated with that, which is they're going to get more information. And it's a voluntary click or a voluntary access point. So information like that at that detailed level would go into this style guide.
Right.
And
that makes sense.
In Storyboard, we would just simply say info button. And that's all the client needs to know, is that it's an info button, and then clicking on this info button will reveal this information. But then in our style guide, there's all the details of what that button is, where does it go. It's consistent on every screen at the same location, because there's that behavior that we're teaching along the way, that if you put a particular navigation button in a certain location and you approve on that, and that's decided upon, then don't move it. You're going to teach that behavior going forward.
Yeah, and it's funny how often in the e-learning world, a lot of things move around, and it's just bad design. and the person's eyes are tracking all over the place, trying to find where to go now. We had a client recently that very non-techie, barely can log in. And after we finished one particular course, we did exactly what you were talking about. There were 3 different color buttons for different things. And he went, "Hey, I figured out what the colors meant." I went, "Wow, we've really made some strides here." But on his own, he actually figured out what the colors meant when they were there, and what he had to do without even paying attention to the instructions on the screen or anything, just by color, which was actually a large step up for a person like that who was totally non-visual, non-techie, non really learning oriented. So it was an interesting aside, and we've been training him actually, because the first piece we did had a lot of interaction. He ripped all of it out. I went, oh gosh. So it became a very flat page turner. So we did a second one for him like that, and he goes, where's the interactions? Ah, you did miss it. So now we're starting to put him in, and he's happy. So it's give him something, they take it out, then when you leave it out, now they start going, well, where's all that stuff? You know, either he was missing the fact he couldn't pull anything else out of the course, or now he said, hey, I kind of like that stuff. It wasn't that bad. And getting back to naming conventions, you know, we took a real simple approach on, for example, audio. And it depends. It doesn't even depend on whether we have 2 audio people or 1 audio voice, depending on how many voices we have in something. But we name everything according to whatever the script is named. So if we have something like LO1, PO1, Lesson 1, Page 1, then we have sequences within that, LO1, PO1, A, B, C, D, E, when things come up on the screen. Or if we have a question, we'll call it something like Q or Q1. So something simple that they can figure out.
That's part of that efficiency.
Yeah,
right?
and every audio file is named exactly according to whatever they see, whether it's LO1, PO1A, that's the audio file name. LO1, PO1B, if we have to make a modification later, it's A1, A2. And we just keep it as simple as possible. I've seen some scripts that were literally AAZZ6456F. And I went, what are we doing, hex? I mean, my gosh. And how the heck is a client going to figure that one out?
Yeah.
Well, one of the fundamental challenges I see is storyboarding conducted in PowerPoint, which PowerPoint is a linear slide stack, you know, top to bottom. And you pass that, they follow the storyboard based on those slides, but then when you get into the interactions and you get into sort of the instructional path, next thing you know, you get a package of audio files named after the PowerPoint slides.
Right.
Slide 1.wave, slide 2.wave. And then so if an example, and this happened to us, I think just earlier this year. So let's say PowerPoint slide 10 is the question, slide 11 is the feedback, correct feedback, and slide 12 is the incorrect feedback. You know, it might have some different visuals, it might have different things going on. So then when you get the audio files, slide 10, 11, and 12. Okay. Even though the actual quiz and the authoring environment all lives in one sort of screen. So
now, do you name the slides? Because that's the workaround, is just naming the slide. So when it prints out, it'll say question 1, question 2, or Q1 feedback, Q whatever. And that kind of avoids that problem a little bit in terms of, because
what Trina's done, and I don't know if she practiced or discovered along the way, but it's been extremely helpful. PowerPoint gives you the ability to add sections. So, and we use predominantly Storyline, where Storyline is hierarchy, scene, slide. So she'll section the PowerPoint based on the scene name, and then each slide will be based on that slide's title name or topic name that's going to appear, you know, actually on the screen. So when you print or condense that particular PowerPoint down, it's mapped out for the most part, exactly how it's going to be named in all of the screens that we end up developing.
Yeah, which makes it way easier afterwards.
Yeah.
And subsequent screens. So if I want to, one of the things that I do when I storyboard is I will build out the screen in sort of the initial state, and then I will build out the screen, and it can be just mocked up visuals, certainly not the final ones, but then I'll build on, okay, and this is the state I want it to be when we're here. And so then, again, using the storyline model, I would have my slide number, 1, and then, or scene number 1, slide number 1, so 1.1, and then that third dot would be the layer number, for instance, or the state.
Well, that's a good idea, because with Storyline, it's a little bit different because of the layers and states. And by the way, that is one of, I think, the most clever things anybody's ever done in e-learning in a long time. I love the layers and the states.
I love them too.
Yeah. They're great. It's just a lot of fun. And
Well-
I mean, you could do it in different ways with other tools, but it's not as intuitive.
Well, I have to apologize, guys. I actually have a client call. Speaking of pesky
Yeah, and we're
clients,
actually-
I have a client
we're
call
running-
in 4 minutes. So
Yeah,
I'm
we're
gonna
having
have
a
to
lot of
drop
fun.
off.
All right, let's end this one. And hey, both you guys have a very Merry Christmas and a wonderful, happy, prosperous, safe, healthy, whatever New Year. And we really appreciate
Well, I just want a real quick plug. Trina and I will be in Atlanta in February at the Training 2015 conference, and we are spending an entire day, the pre-conference workshop, talking about this very subject. So if it's something that your viewers are interested in learning more about storyboarding as a process and how to get it from one phase into the other, would love to have you and join us there.
That sounds
And
great.
we'll
What date
also
was
be
that?
At Learning Solutions Conference
First,
covering
let's
that
see,
as well.
February,
And that's in March.
March. No,
Orlando.
Learning Solutions, not Training Magazine.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
Learning
yeah.
Solutions in March.
Learning
Okay,
Solutions.
that'll be great. I'll see both of you
That's
guys
gonna
there.
be somewhere in February, though.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably no. Technology is January, I think. But well, that's great. Well, hey, we'll plug it on the show. We'll put it in the show notes as well to go to that pre-learning conference. Those are always fun. And I hope this time I don't miss you guys because we're going to be at Learning Solutions too. I think I'm helping in the iSpring booth. So just drop by iSpring real quick and say hi, or we'll meet up somewhere else.
We will. We'll catch
Well,
up.
you know, if we're not at the conferences together, your viewers can find us. We're doing a series of storyline webinars as well, workshops. So they can find us on the Training Live and Online website as well.
That sounds great.
That's where Training Magazine was in my brain a minute ago.
Yep. Well, you guys, thanks for being on the
Thanks
show.
so much for having us, Rick.
Thanks, Rick. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And if you're watching the show, please subscribe and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And check out the show notes. We always put information on where you can locate all of the guests. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Have a happy New Year, too. Bye.
Bye.